Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really crack open the playbooks of some of the world's most, well, ambitious organizations.
That's right.
And today we are doing a deep exploration, really digging into a goal-setting philosophy that has pretty much defined Silicon Valley's success. We're talking about a system built for focus, for alignment, and maybe most importantly, for top-tier execution. We're talking about objectives and key results, OKRs.
Yeah, and it's really so much more than just, metrics or some kind of annual report card.
Yeah.
We're looking at OKRs as a genuine system. Think of it like an operating system specifically for ambition.
Okay.
It got its start at Intel, famously,
Yeah.
and then leaders like John Doerr really brought it into the global spotlight,
Yeah.
especially through Google.
Right?
So our mission today is really to get past the acronym, and excavate the deeper stuff, the behavioral shifts, the leadership demands, even the sort of philosophical underpinnings you need to make a system this demanding actually stick.
That's the real challenge, isn't it? The concept seems simple. An objective, what you want to achieve, and then maybe 3 to 5 measurable key results, how you know you got there.
Sounds easy enough.
But getting it working, that demands, well, almost a revolution in culture and mindset. Okay, so let's start unpacking the mechanism itself. What's the fundamental structural thing that makes OKRs different from, say, the usual goals you see on a company's strategic plan? #tag Artane A, introduction and mechanism of OKRs, direct focus.
Well, the structure itself, right from the get-go, forces clarity and ambition. Our sources, especially the ones detailing the history, they really point out 2 critical types of goals, and they're pursued at the same time within the same cycle.
Okay, 2 types. So the first type is like the baseline, the non-negotiables.
Exactly. You start with what are called committed OKRs. Think of these as the bread and butter goals, the absolute must-haves.
Right.
These are usually tactical, maybe operational achievements, and the expectation is 100% attainment, no wiggle room.
So if you miss a committed OKR,
You failed.
yeah.
It means a critical deliverable for the whole organization wasn't met. They are, like you said, non-negotiable.
Okay, crystal clear. And then there's the other type, the one that drives the energy, the aspirational OKR. This is where we hear that BHAG term sometimes, right? Big, hairy, audacious goal.
That's the one. It's definitely the more exciting one, but honestly, it's also the trickiest, culturally speaking. Aspirational goals are designed to stretch you.
How so?
They're not just about meeting expectations. They're about pushing past what the team even thinks is possible right now. Their whole purpose is to spark that, blue sky thinking, stimulate creative problem solving, really nudge the organization out of its comfort zone.
And crucially, you're not actually expected to hit 100% on these.
No, absolutely not. That's key. Getting, say, 70% on an aspirational OKR, that's often seen as a fantastic result. Why? Because you aimed so incredibly high to begin with.
Okay, that tension right there feels like the biggest communication hurdle for any leader. How do you actually convince your team that aiming for, I don't know, $10 million and hitting $7 million is genuinely better, more valuable than aiming low for $6 million and hitting it perfectly 100%?
It takes work.
Yeah.
You have to actively build the cultural mechanisms, the rituals, to celebrate that 70% achievement. And you need to frame the 30% gap not as some kind of failure, but as a rich learning opportunity.
Because otherwise...
Otherwise, if people get penalized, even subtly, for aiming high and falling short, they will immediately snap back to setting safe, easily achievable, committed OKRs just to protect their performance review. The whole system collapses.
Right.
The team has to believe, truly believe, that stretching is safe, even encouraged. That $7 million goal proves massive execution muscle and significant progress. The $6 million, 100% success. That actually shows a failure of ambition, maybe even poor forecasting.
Okay, so beyond the goals themselves, the source material brings up something else as critical for making OKRs work today. Technology. Infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely vital. Look, in today's world, things move so fast. OKRs are basically dead on arrival if they just live in some static spreadsheet somewhere. For them to stay useful, stay relevant, you really have to invest in a proper platform, something dedicated, probably automated, definitely cloud-based.
And this isn't just for, like, tracking.
No, it's way more than admin. The platform itself helps enforce the right behaviors. It needs to support goals being public, allow for collaboration, and this is critical real-time updates and adjustments.
Tell me more about the failure this prevents. What goes wrong without that kind of platform?
It prevents what you might call the waterfall effect of goal setting. The old way. The CEO sets the grand strategy in January.
Yeah.
It slowly trickles down to the VPs by maybe March.
You're lucky.
Right. And then the individual contributors finally get their specific goals sometime in June, and often they feel totally disconnected from what the CEO said way back when. A good platform forces transparency. If goals aren't public, if they can't be adjusted quickly as things change, the system just fails to provide that continuous alignment everyone needs.
So everyone can see how their specific task, their key result, links up the chain.
Exactly. Links right up to the big aspirational objective for the whole company in real time. So when the strategy inevitably shifts, because let's face it, the world shifts constantly, everyone can adapt together.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, but let's circle back to that fine line of ambition you mentioned. You want stretch, but the sources also warn pretty strongly about going too far. Where's that line between audacious and just demoralizing?
It's a really crucial caution.
Yeah.
Yeah, the purpose is to stimulate bigger achievement, but you absolutely cannot set the bar so high that the OKR looks, mathematically impossible from the start.
Like asking the team to invent cold fusion by Q3.
Exactly. If everyone looks at it and just knows it can't be done, morale plummets instantly. The system relies on intrinsic motivation, on the belief that success, even partial success on a big stretch goal, is at least humanly possible.
Right.
When goals are just completely unrealistic, the tool that was meant to drive execution actually breeds cynicism. The team basically gives up before they even start. So the leader's job becomes calibration. Set the bar high, yes, but keep it within the realm of the possible.
So the goal needs to feel like a huge challenge, definitely, but not like some kind of cruel joke. Okay, that leads us neatly into accountability. How do leaders make sure the system balancing guaranteed stuff with these lofty stretches actually works? How do they ensure goals get achieved, not just, fade away halfway through the quarter?
Accountability. That's the bridge, isn't it? Where the abstract plan meets the gritty reality of execution. To make a system like OKRs really hum, you need the right kind of management engine and definitely the right leadership mindset, which actually brings us perfectly to some fundamental principles about just being an effective executive.
Right. So if OKRs are the software application, the executive needs to manage the hardware running it, and that hardware is basically their own time and attention. Peter Drucker's work, it challenges that common idea that you start by, writing a brilliant plan.
It really does. Drucker basically says effective executives don't start with planning the work. They start by managing their time.
Yeah.
And the very first step is kind of counterintuitive.
Which is?
Finding out where their time actually goes.
Yeah.
This means like disciplined time auditing, recording what you're doing for a few weeks. And most executives, they're genuinely shocked.
Shocked how?
They find their time is just being devoured by unproductive stuff, constant firefighting, meetings they probably shouldn't even be in.
It's that gap between how you intend to spend your day and the messy reality. Okay, so once they have that maybe uncomfortable data, what's the next step? The action plan.
Drucker lays out a pretty clear three-step process.
Oh.
First, you find the lost time by logging it, like we said. Second, you manage that time, which means ruthlessly cutting unproductive demands, having the courage to say no.
That's hard for a lot of people.
It is. And third, you take that precious discretionary time you've clawed back and you consolidate it. You put it together into the largest possible continuous blocks.
What are the big blocks? Why not just grab 15 minutes here and there throughout the day? Seems more flexible.
Because truly effective, high-value work, the kind of deep strategic thinking you need to hit those aspirational OKRs, it demands focus, real focus, not fragmented attention.
Right.
If you need, say, 2 solid hours to crack a complex problem or draft a critical strategy document, one single 2-hour block is infinitely more productive than trying to stitch together 8 scattered 15-minute slots with interruptions in between.
Makes sense.
And this consolidation, it's vital because focusing on managing your time effectively is really synonymous with focusing on contribution. And that, for Drucker, is the very definition of executive effectiveness.
Yeah.
You're aiming your most limited, non-renewable resource, your time, at the things that yield the biggest strategic impact.
Which brings us right back to prioritization. The sources suggest this is a really deep-seated problem for a lot of us, and we often misdiagnose it as just, lacking discipline.
Yeah, people often think, oh, if I just had more willpower or if I was better organized. But the fundamental issue usually isn't the lack of a to-do list or weak discipline.
So what is it?
The core problem is that the priorities haven't become deeply embedded. They aren't planted firmly in their hearts and minds, as Stephen Covey might put it. They haven't truly internalized the underlying mission or vision. It hasn't connected to their core principles.
So if you haven't really bought into the company's why this specific OKR actually matters in the bigger picture, then your personal priorities are kind of vulnerable.
Exactly. Vulnerable to external pressures. If your personal sense of worth is tied up in things like, say, always pleasing others or avoiding any kind of conflict or chasing superficial rewards, you're easily pulled off course. You'll end up saying yes to low-value requests just to be nice. You'll chase immediate wins instead of long-term impact. You'll naturally set low, safe-committed OKRs that you know you can hit, rather than daring to set those aspirational ones. And doing that basically undermines the whole point of the OKR system.
So the discipline needed to execute a tough OKR, it's only really sustainable if it's anchored in something deeper?
Precisely. It needs to be rooted in an internalized vision, a connection to purpose that makes those hard trade-off decisions almost automatic. #TagChatB. Commitment and action over theory.
Okay, so once that internal priority is set, the next thing you need for execution sounds like, well, absolute decisiveness. And our sources bring in some pretty intense historical metaphors here, including Lenin's teachings on revolutionary methods.
Yeah, it's strong stuff. Lenin's advice, even though it's about political uprising, has this zero-tolerance approach to hesitation that, frankly, applies really well to any high-stakes corporate initiative. His point was, don't just play around with an uprising. Once you start, you have to act with absolute decisiveness. Go on the offensive. Full stop.
Wow. So total unwavering commitment to the objective. No plan B that involves backing down.
That's the idea. It's a powerful internal commitment. But of course, maintaining that level of drive over a long, tough execution cycle is really difficult.
So how do you keep the momentum going?
That's where the idea of striving daily for at least small victories comes in. It's about maintaining psychological momentum, what some might call moral superiority,
Moral superiority.
in the sense of belief and confidence. Think about a long project, maybe a multi-year product development cycle or a huge corporate transformation. If you don't consistently deliver small, tangible wins along the way, the sense of progress fades. The perceived superiority can shift to the competition or just to the inertia of how things used to be. Momentum is a very real psychological force.
Okay. Now, Sun Tzu adds another layer to this commitment idea, and it involves a pretty radical psychological tactic,
Yeah.
basically forcing the outcome by taking away the option to retreat.
All right, Sun Tzu, on one hand, demands intense planning, clarity of vision, depth of design. But he also talks about putting your army into desperate straits or deadly peril, specifically to compel survival.
And the classic example is Anshin.
Yeah, that's the famous one often cited in leadership books. Han Xian, the general, deliberately lined his troops up with their backs against a river before a battle. No escape route.
Okay, hold on. Forcing desperation. How does that square with everything we hear today about psychological safety and employee engagement? It sounds completely counterintuitive for a modern leader.
And that is the absolute core tension, isn't it? Han Xian's river wasn't a literal instruction for modern managers to, endanger their employees.
Hope not.
It's a powerful metaphor. It's about strategically eliminating the easy way out when commitment is absolutely paramount.
So in a business context,
It might mean things like deliberately removing the safety net of excessive budget padding on a critical project, or removing the option to just switch back to the old software system during a difficult tech transition, or setting a really aggressive deadline that forces the team to innovate under pressure because the standard approach won't work fast enough.
so you're removing the safe option of retreat or failure.
Exactly. You maximize the effort toward survival, toward success, by making it the only viable path. It forces radical problem solving that just wouldn't happen otherwise. But, and this is critical, the leader has to apply this kind of pressure strategically, ethically. The desperation has to be tied clearly to the mission's success, not driven by malice or carelessness. #tag C, the need for sharpened tools. But before we get too carried away with forcing functions and desperation, we need to ground ourselves in some foundational wisdom. Confucius brings ambition back down to earth.
Ah, the famous line, tradesmen wanting to be good at their trade must first sharpen their tools. Simple, profound, and yeah, often overlooked when everyone's rushing to just do something.
Absolutely. If you apply that directly to ambitious execution, it means success demands preparation. It means making sure your capabilities, your resources, the organization's tools are actually optimal before you launch into action. And tools here means more than just physical equipment, right? Oh, much more. In today's world, tools are things like up-to-date training for your people, modern software systems, clean and accessible data pipelines, refined internal processes. If your big OKR depends on complex data analysis, but your team hasn't been trained in data literacy or your data infrastructure is, frankly, ancient.
Then the goal is basically doomed from the start.
Pretty much. Regardless of how committed the team is, it's a grounding principle. Great strategy and immense willpower can't magically overcome inadequate preparation or broken tools. You just can't skip the hard work of building capability first. Hashtag Tango D. The wisdom of spontaneity versus design. And yet, just as we absorbed Confucius's call for meticulous preparation, we run into this fascinating counterpoint from Emerson. He championed something different. Vital force, spontaneity. This feels like a pivot point between careful design and, well, dynamic reality.
Yeah, Emerson seems almost suspicious of overly detailed plans. He says things like, nature hates calculators, her methods are saltatory and impulsive, and life is a series of surprises.
He's pushing back against the idea that you can control everything through central planning. He argues that for real practical success, you actually need less rigid design. He talks about power operating through these subterranean and invisible tunnels and channels of life.
So while preparation sharpening the tools is vital,
Ultimate success often hinges on being able to embrace that vital force, that inspired immediate adaptation to the unexpected. It's about harnessing spontaneity, not just sticking rigidly to an over-engineered plan that didn't account for reality's surprises.
Okay, so if Confucius gives us the pre-flight checklist and the sharpened tools, Emerson gives us the pilot's instinct to react to turbulence. How do flexible OKRs handle these saltatory impulses, the spontaneity Emerson talks about?
Well, this is precisely why OKRs must be reviewed frequently, monthly, maybe quarterly at the longest, because the environment is going to change.
Right.
If some massive, completely unplanned opportunity suddenly appears an impulse from nature, as Emerson might say, the team needs to feel empowered to say, okay, this existing key result, it's no longer the most important thing.
And
then they can potentially kill it and spontaneously create a new key result to grab that surprise opportunity.
Yeah.
The system has to be robust enough to execute the plan you started with, but flexible enough to pivot and handle creative disruption when it happens.
So the greatest achievements might not follow the plan exactly.
In Emerson's view, they often come by fits and thrive by casualties, meaning through unexpected events and setbacks, provided they are fueled by that vital force supplied from the eternal. It's about planned structure meeting dynamic energy.
Okay, we've got the structure of the goal, the OKR itself. We've talked about the necessary mindset for the executive managing time, focus, commitment. But as we touched on earlier, none of this actually works without leadership actively cultivating the right environment. Execution really is a mirror reflecting the leadership culture. Hashtag A, leading by example and modeling accountability.
Absolutely. Executing ambitious OKRs isn't something leaders can just delegate down the chain and forget about. It demands visible, active participation right from the very top.
John Doerr makes this point really strongly, doesn't he? To get real commitment, leaders have to practice what they preach, which means modeling the behavior they expect, like sharing their own individual OKRs publicly, maybe in an all-hands meeting.
Yes, and that act of public vulnerability from a leader is incredibly powerful. It does a couple of crucial things.
Like what?
First, it sends a clear message. I'm accountable to this system too. Nobody is above the mechanism of focus. That builds trust immediately.
And second,
and maybe even more importantly, it creates psychological safety. It signals to contributors that it's okay for them to evaluate the leader's goals, maybe even suggest improvements or point out potential conflicts.
wow, an employee giving feedback on the CEO's OKRs.
Exactly. That kind of exchange, that feedback loop going both ways, is a massive driver of cultural buy-in and true alignment. It transforms the OKR system from feeling like a top-down mandate into a genuinely collaborative effort.
And this idea of cultural commitment, it ties back really nicely to Simon Sinek's golden circle concept, right? Connecting the specific task, the what, back to the ultimate purpose, the why.
Perfectly. Sinek argues that great leaders operate in balance. They relentlessly pursue the WHY, the core purpose, the belief driving the organization. They hold themselves and others accountable to how do they achieve it, the values, the processes. And the what, the actual results, the OKRs, in this case, serves as the tangible proof of what they believe.
So the OKRs, the what, only really resonate and get buy-in when they're explicitly linked back to that fundamental why.
Exactly. Without that connection, they just feel like arbitrary numbers on a dashboard.
Yeah.
With it, they become meaningful milestones on a shared mission. Hashtag, tag, tag, be Keel. Extreme ownership and communication.
Okay, so if the golden circle gives us the sort of moral compass, the philosophy of extreme ownership provides the tactical certainty needed for actual execution, especially under pressure.
Yeah, this concept, drawn largely from high-stakes military leadership, particularly the Navy SEALs, is pretty uncompromising. It states that the leader bears full, complete, absolute responsibility for everything.
Everything.
The mission, the tactics chosen, the team's training, the resources they have, everything. So when a subordinate fails or a plan goes wrong, the leader's first instinct must be to look in the mirror.
Not to blame downwards.
Never. It completely eliminates the ability to just pass the buck down the chain of command. It forces that hard self-reflection. Was the brief clear enough? Was the training adequate? Did they have the right tools and support?
That's incredibly powerful, but it also brings up a really tough question about individual performance. What happens if, after mentoring, training, support, someone on the team just consistently isn't performing? Where does the leader's ultimate loyalty lie then?
Extreme ownership demands that the leader's primary loyalty must be to the team and to the mission above any single individual. So, if an underperformer is genuinely jeopardizing the team's ability to execute the mission, to achieve the critical OKRs, despite efforts to help them improve, then the leader has to make the tough call.
Which might mean letting them go.
It might. Loyalty to the overall mission's success and to the rest of the team who are counting on everyone pulling their weight has to supersede what might feel like misplaced loyalty to one individual who simply can't meet the standard required. It's about protecting the team's morale and the integrity of the mission.
And extreme ownership also hammers home the need for absolute clarity in communication, right? Especially when the stakes are high and complex, OKRs need to be translated into concrete actions for everyone.
Simplicity is paramount. Briefs, instructions, plans they need to be stripped down to the absolute essential pieces. And they have to be understandable by, as the principle goes, the most junior man, the person with the least context.
This isn't about dumbing down the strategy, though.
Not at all. It's about making the execution steps crystal clear, unambiguous. They emphasize using visual aids maps, simple sketches on a whiteboard, and crucially, they have people brief back the parts of the plan they were responsible for leading.
Why is that briefing back so important?
Because it forces active understanding, not just passive listening. If the most junior team member can accurately explain their piece of the plan and how it connects to the overall objective, then you know they truly understand it. And if they understand it, they can execute their key result effectively. Hashtag EC, fostering collaboration and debate.
Okay, so executing ambitious OKRs clearly depends on the team functioning really well together, especially under pressure. And that requires psychological safety, built on trust. But this throws up a potential conflict, doesn't it? How do you reconcile the military's demand for that kind of absolute commitment and hierarchical responsibility, extreme ownership, with the modern emphasis on open, flat, psychologically safe debate we hear about from people like Lencioni or see at places like Bixar?
That's the essential synthesis modern leadership demands. It's not really a contradiction if you frame it right. Psychological safety doesn't mean safety from hard work or safety from accountability or safety from failure even.
What does it mean then?
It means safety from punishment for speaking up honestly. Safety for asking tough questions, for challenging assumptions, for engaging in healthy debate before the final plan is locked and execution begins.
So the team needs to trust that the leader, who practices extreme ownership and takes responsibility, actually has their back if they raise a valid concern.
Exactly. That trust allows them to engage in what Patrick Lencioni calls constructive conflict, or healthy debate. His work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team points out that a lack of trust is the foundation for all other dysfunctions. And it often shows up first as an absence of passionate debate.
Why? Because people are afraid.
Yeah, teams that avoid interpersonal discomfort, that shy away from disagreeing openly, will almost certainly fail later when it comes to holding peers accountable for delivering their key results. Accountability feels too confrontational if you haven't built the muscle for healthy debate first.
And Lencioni also stresses that in a truly functional team, the collective result hitting the team's OKR has to matter more than any individual member's ego or status.
Absolutely. When people are more worried about protecting their turf or looking smart or avoiding blame, they pull their punches during critical discussions. They might nod along to an OKR that, deep down, they know has flaws or is unrealistic.
Okay, but debate for debate's sake isn't helpful. It needs to be productive.
Right. And this is where Liz Wiseman's concept of leaders acting as multipliers, specifically as debate makers, comes in. These leaders are skilled at framing the issue clearly. They ensure the debate stays focused on facts, on data, on the problem itself, not on personalities or opinions.
So they elevate the quality of the discussion.
Exactly. They draw out everyone's best thinking to really pressure test the assumptions behind an OKR before the team commits.
And practically, one way they do this is by delegating the debate itself, or the decision, to specific owners lower down. Why is delegating the debate, not just the task, so important?
Because it pushes the discussion down to where the facts live, to the people closest to the actual work. It helps avoid that classic trap of senior leaders sitting in an isolated conference room, making big strategic calls based on incomplete or outdated information, completely disconnected from the ground reality.
You want the people with the detailed knowledge making the fact-based arguments.
Precisely. Rather than just having the most senior person's opinion dominate because of hierarchy. This leads to much stronger, more realistic, and ultimately more achievable key results.
And we even see this emphasis on forcing collaboration reflected in physical spaces, like the design of Pixar's campus.
Yeah, Steve Jobs was famously deliberate about that. He designed the central atrium at Pixar specifically to force people to mingle and bump into each other. He put the mailboxes there, the main cafe, the meeting rooms, all the essential spots right in the center to deliberately engineer interaction between people from different departments. Animators, engineers, story artists, who might otherwise stay in their own silos. The goal was to foster a sense of community and spark those spontaneous cross-disciplinary conversations where unexpected ideas often emerge, not just in scheduled meetings.
And the military, again, provides a really extreme example of breaking down barriers, even for highly sensitive information.
Right. The need for what General McChrystal called emergent intelligence, getting the whole picture by connecting disparate pieces of information, led them to create these, well, unprecedented open-floor environments, even for top-secret work.
So analysts, operators, liaisons, all working side by side despite handling classified material.
Exactly. It was about eliminating every possible excuse for information silos. The ultimate aim is that shared consciousness, that holistic view of the entire system, where everyone understands how their piece fits into the bigger strategic objective and can execute accordingly. Hashtag PSE, the philosophical foundation of action.
Okay, we have nailed down the structure, the OKRs themselves. We've covered the tactics, the executive mindset, the leadership modeling required. But what actually sustains this kind of intense drive, this ambition, through the inevitable long stretches of difficulty and uncertainty? Now we need to shift focus a bit to the deeper, often invisible, mental and emotional work that really underpins sustained ambition. Hashtag A. Avoiding mental biases in goal setting.
Yeah, any successful operating system, whether it's code or human endeavor, needs to protect itself from bad inputs, from flawed data. And when humans are involved, the most common source of flawed data often comes from our own internal mental biases.
Nassim Taleb talks a lot about this, particularly the bias of being fooled by randomness. This seems absolutely central to how we assess risk when we're setting those big aspirational OKRs.
It really is. And it happens largely because of survivorship bias. Information naturally hides failure. We constantly hear the success stories, the unicorn startup, the investor who struck gold because the winners are visible.
But the failures?
The failures are often silent, buried. They disappear. And this leads executives, all of us really, to systematically overestimate our chances of success. We set overconfident, sometimes wildly unrealistic, OKRs based on an incomplete picture.
And we confuse correlation with causation.
Exactly. Taleb points out we confuse the necessary with the causal. We see that technologies that survived obviously had beneficial features. But we forget that many other technologies that also had obvious benefits simply didn't survive for other reasons. Bad timing, poor marketing, lack of funding, sheer bad luck. Just having a good plan, a beneficial product, is necessary, but it's not a guarantee of success.
Okay, and even when we try to consciously calculate the odds, we bump up against these really deep-seated cognitive biases around risk, highlighted by the work of Kahneman and Tversky.
Oh, absolutely. That's the classic prospect theory stuff, particularly risk aversion in the domain of gains. We are just not rational calculators when it comes to probability and value.
We prefer certainty.
We overwhelmingly prefer a sure thing, even if it's mathematically less valuable, over a gamble with a higher expected payoff. The famous example is offering people a choice.
Yeah.
A guaranteed $800, or an 85% chance of winning $1,000 and a 15% chance of getting nothing.
And most people take the sure $800.
Yes, even though the gamble's expected value is higher, $850, that preference for certainty is incredibly strong.
So how does that bias directly sabotage OKR setting?
Well, it explains perfectly why teams, left to their own devices, will naturally gravitate towards setting low, safe, easily achievable, committed OKRs. That's the guaranteed $800. They shy away from setting those really high-value, game-changing aspirational OKRs, the $1,000 gamble, because there's a chance of failure, even though failure in that context might still represent huge progress.
So our innate human preference for certainty actively fights against the core principle of the OKR system, which demands stretching into uncertainty.
Precisely. Which means leaders have to be very conscious of this bias
Huh?
and actively counteract it. They need to create that safety and actively reward the behavior of stretching, regardless of the final percentage achieved on those aspirational goals.
Ah.
Tag B, the power of psychological stance. So, to fight these biases and maintain the consistency you need for long-term execution, mastering our internal state becomes paramount. Our actions, our decisions, are hugely influenced by what some psychologists call state-specific reality.
That's the powerful insight that our emotions literally create their own reality for us in the moment, right? When we're feeling a strong emotion, maybe intense anger after a setback, or maybe euphoria after a small win, our mind unconsciously filters everything.
It does. It reshuffles memories, highlights certain options for action, and makes others seem irrelevant or invisible, all to align with that dominant feeling. It's why we often regret things said or done in the heat of the moment.
And controlling that internal emotional weather is critical if you want to execute complex goals rationally over time. This is where some ancient wisdom seems incredibly relevant as, like, the ultimate management tool, Cicero, for instance.
Yes, Cicero had this idea of what characterizes a truly brave and great soul. He said it involved two key things. First, a kind of contempt for outward circumstances, not being overly swayed by external events. And second, crucially, freedom from all disturbing passions.
Freedom from desire, fear, anxiety, anger. The whole turbulent mix. The goal being to maintain serenity of mind. Okay, that sounds, frankly, almost impossible for an executive driving high-stakes OKRs in a competitive market. Why is that kind of emotional detachment considered so vital?
Because those disturbing passions cloud judgment. Desire can lead to irrational grasping, making us chase vanity metrics. Fear leads to paralysis or premature retreat. Anger leads to impulsive, often destructive decisions.
While the OKR executive needs objectivity.
Yes. They need to be able to look at the data, assess the situation clearly, even when the news is bad, without their emotions hijacking the response. The Bhagavad Gita offers a remarkably similar perspective. It speaks of the person of understanding acting with their mind and intelligence perfectly controlled.
Giving up that sense of personal ownership over possessions or outcomes.
Right, acting only for the bare necessities, as it were. The core idea being that such a person remains steady, unaffected by whether the results are perceived as good or bad. Their focus remains purely on performing the right action, the necessary action, dictated by their duty or role, regardless of the eventual outcome.
So that mental detachment, acting without being personally invested in ego gratification from the outcome, becomes the ultimate psychological armor for long-term ambition.
You could see it that way. If your entire sense of self-worth isn't completely tangled up in whether you hit 100% on this specific key result this quarter, you retain the ability to analyze setbacks with cold clarity. You can make the objective, rational course correction needed to keep the larger mission moving forward. It provides the kind of inner calm, that serenity, required to sustain the marathon of execution, not just the sprint. #ChatGPT, finding your own way. So we started this journey with a very structured management system, OKRs, but ultimately the deepest source of motivation, the drive to use that system effectively, has to come from within the individual. And here, Lao Tzu offers a caution about chasing tangible values too directly.
Right. Lao Tzu warns against trying to grasp too firmly onto specific ethical rules or political goals within the way, because that very act of grasping pulls you away from the way itself. The true way, he suggests, is sort of empty, deep, mysterious, enduring, it sounds like he's saying. Don't mistake the metric for the mission. Don't let the key result become the ultimate point.
That's a great way to put it. It's the ultimate caution against letting the OKR, the tool, become the master. If your focus becomes solely fixed on hitting the numbers, the tangible metrics, you risk losing sight of the deeper, more profound purpose that hopefully underlies the entire effort. And this connects really beautifully with Abraham Maslow's ideas about intrinsic growth.
Maslow's hierarchy, self-actualization. He argued that a healthy person isn't just shaped by their environment, but is driven from within towards fuller development, right? By these intrinsic growth tendencies.
Exactly. For the self-actualizing person, Maslow said, the environment, including things like organizational structures, goals, rewards, is primarily just a means to their own self-actualizing ends. It represents true psychological freedom.
So applying that to OKRs, the system works best when it aligns with and facilitates that intrinsic drive.
Precisely. The key result shouldn't feel like just another task imposed from above. Ideally, achieving it should also serve the individual's own sense of growth, mastery, or contribution to something meaningful. If the OKR system is perceived purely as a control mechanism, a leash, rather than a tool that helps people achieve their own potential through contributing to the organization's goals, then that initial ambition and engagement will likely wither over time. #D. The inevitability of trouble.
Okay, so even with perfectly designed systems, highly motivated people, and maybe even some philosophical detachment, reality has a way of intruding. Trouble happens. Consequences arrive. Emerson has that line about the universal law of compensation.
Right. Emerson insists that justice isn't postponed. A perfect equity adjusts its balance in all parts of life. Basically, the universe keeps score. If you cut corners on delivering a committed OKR, if you accrue technical debt, if you compromise quality, the consequence will eventually surface. There's no real escaping the downstream effects of our actions, good or bad. They may be delayed, but they arrive.
And yet, we see leaders who often start out idealistic, believing in pure logic and truth, only to find themselves later relying much more on sheer power and influence. The example of Robert Moses, the builder of so much of modern New York City, comes to mind.
Moses is a classic, albeit controversial example. He began his career as a true idealist, believing passionately that rational arguments and the inherent truth of his plans would naturally prevail.
But that's not how it played out.
No. His later career was characterized by an almost total reliance on political power, force of personality, backroom dealing, and maneuvering to push through his massive, often disruptive public works projects. It highlights a pragmatic, sometimes uncomfortable truth for anyone trying to achieve ambitious goals.
Yeah.
Pure virtue, elegant logic, the rightness of your plan. These are often insufficient on their own to move the complex, messy machinery of the real world.
So you need both, the integrity of the design and the force of will, maybe even political skill to execute.
It certainly seems that way in many cases. And finally, related to this, we have to acknowledge something about human nature when it comes to facing problems, which impacts how leaders can even initiate change. John Locke observed this centuries ago.
What was his observation?
Locke noted that while the theoretical end goal of government is the good of mankind, people in reality are generally disposed to suffer quite a bit before they actually push back or resist mismanagement.
We tolerate bad situations for a long time.
We do. Real resistance, Locke argued, usually only occurs when the problems have become widespread, when the mischief has grown general, and the negative consequences of the poor leadership or bad system become blatantly visible to almost everyone.
That's a critical insight for any leader trying to implement a major change, like rolling out a rigorous new OKR system, isn't it?
Absolutely. Don't expect people to eagerly embrace a solution to organizational problems they haven't fully felt the pain of yet. People often tolerate significant inefficiency, bad processes, unclear goals, until the situation becomes truly untenable, maybe even catastrophically visible, like missing targets quarter after quarter. The leader often has to be the catalyst, pushing for change and implementing the new system before the majority feels ready, before the suffering becomes unbearable. They have to anticipate the pain point. #V, conclusion.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has really shown that the simple structural mechanism of OKRs that split between the must-do committed goals and the big reach aspirational ones, that's really just the price of admission.
Yeah, just the starting point.
Sustaining real ambition, actually executing on those goals consistently, that requires so much more. Rigorous executive focus on time and priorities, that decisiveness in action we talked about, and maybe above all, leadership that actively models accountability and fosters enough psychological safety for real debate and clarity around execution.
And then underneath all those practical mechanics, there's that deep philosophical foundation we explored. Being aware of the mental biases that constantly try to skew our judgment and ambition. The necessity of cultivating some emotional control, that serenity, to navigate the inevitable difficulties. And that constant dynamic balancing act between meticulous preparation, sharpening your tools like Confucius said, and also embracing that vital spontaneous energy Emerson talked about, allowing you to seize unexpected opportunities.
You know, what really stands out to me is that inherent tension between, let's call it virtue and expediency. We naturally want to admire the perfect plan, the noble intention, the integrity of the approach, the lion's skin, as it were.
Right, the direct, honorable approach.
But what happens when the sheer logic of the plan or the undeniable nobility of your intention just isn't enough by itself to actually secure the objective, to win?
And that brings us right back to the kind of strategic, maybe even cunning mindset required for real-world execution. It reminds me of that story from Plutarch about the Spartan general Lysander. Facing a challenging situation where brute force alone wouldn't work, Lysander famously believed, where the lion's skin will not protect us, we must sew the fox's skin to it.
The fox's skin, representing cleverness, expediency, stratagem, adaptation, the willingness to maneuver, to use every available tool, even if it feels a bit less noble than a straightforward charge.
Exactly. So the final provocative thought for you, the listener, might be this. When you're designing your next big objective, your next ambitious plan, how much do you consciously, explicitly plan for that necessary element of expediency? How much do you build in the flexibility and the cunning of the fox, rather than relying solely on the perceived strength and dignity of the lion's skin, the perfection and purity of your original plan?
It's really a question of whether your operating system for ambition is built for the idealized world as it should be, or for the complex, messy, unpredictable world as it actually is.
A profound challenge indeed. Definitely something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.